Jared Tendler, welcome back to the Business of Betting podcast. It's a pleasure to have you back on.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you're looking to find your edge in sports betting or racing, you'll need to visit the Betfair Hub. From analysis to betting psychology, it has everything that you need. Simply visit betfair.com.au/hub.
Jared Tendler, welcome back to the Business of Betting podcast. It's a pleasure to have you back on.
Jake, good to be here, man.
So, how's your golf game going? I guess not a lot going on this time of the year with everything going on in the world.
Yeah, I was pretty bummed. I signed up for the U.S. Open qualifier again and was supposed to be playing in 3 weeks, but yeah, it got canceled, obviously. I think they're going to reschedule it, but I'm not sure when that's going to happen, and you never know what schedules, how they'll line up, so we'll see what happens.
So it's weird. I've had 125 different guests and people on the show, and people obviously have their preferences, and a lot of it's aligned with if they're sports bettors, they'll like the professional gamblers on that side. If they're horse players, if they're bookmakers or whatever it might be. But it's funny, your name comes up probably uniquely the most out of everyone across all those demographics.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's strange, and I was looking back this morning, just doing some basic prep for this, and I was trying to figure out why there's only been one mental coach on all my episodes, and a lot of other podcasts there's either 0 or 0. It seems like we're not evolving yet, and we're not realizing what the mental side of it really can be if we harness it properly.
Yeah, a lot of people like to say that they're aware of it, they're dealing with it, but they're not.
And I would imagine that's across the board, not just in gambling or sports or the fields that you cover.
It is in general. I mean, I've been working a lot more with esports in the last couple of years. I think I probably mentioned it when I was on the show last time, but it's definitely expanding there. I think the competency level is still really low. So what you're getting is a lot of guys like kind of straight out of college with a BA in sports psychology, and they're getting jobs, with esports organizations. All the major sports franchises have people on staff. But like even professional golfers, like it's definitely ubiquitous, but the degree to which the guys are like really open to doing good work. Like I've had, some PGA Tour players who I can't name names, but like guys at that level, it's not just in golf, but sometimes guys at that level, women as well, they are more interested in kind of defending their turf, even though they still have runway still left to get better, than they are as kind of truly, actively trying to get better. And to me, it's kind of like, the entrenched corporate, businesses that are like still have that startup mentality, right? They're still aggressive at like getting into new verticals and expanding their business and coming up with new ways of operating. And they realize that you either adapt or die, and they're willing to do that. And I think sometimes, people at the top are not always willing to be as aggressive with that. And especially when you are kind of like your own business, as a sports bettor, as a trader, punter, it can be tough to feel like you're like, you don't really know, you're the one who has to make the decisions, versus when it's coming kind of from the outside. Sometimes it can be a little bit easier. So I think people have a hard time like really getting over the threshold to take the risks that are necessary. And funny enough, sometimes it's the risk that is not taken that is actually greater than it's the risk that you're not taking that are actually far less risky than doing nothing. Like doing nothing is oftentimes the far riskier bet.
Yeah, I totally agree. And even just thinking back to teenage years playing Aussie rules football, and even just the mindset of different people. You had the guys who were really talented and throughout their entire childhood were the best player on the team and probably didn't need to worry about anything other than turning up on the day. And then you have some other people that were, the white line fever type people that did everything in their power, use every inch of energy and what they could, once they got on the field to be good. It seems like, in certain categories of athletes that do exist, and even, I guess, on the betting side as well, if you do have an immense amount of talent, maybe it's something that often is not necessarily in your wheelhouse in terms of worth considering.
It's tricky. I mean, when things come too easily, people take it for granted. When things come too easily, you're not actually developing like the hardened skills you need to actually be able to, push through those bad runs, those challenging times, the failures, the missteps. I've heard, that NFL GMs are pretty reticent to draft quarterbacks that have not really failed, not really struggled. Get the guy that's won a couple national championships and won All-State in high school and never really lost. Like they don't know really how he's going to handle those losses or those failures. Like they kind of want to see that before they get into the NFL. So it's kind of very similar.
So I wanted to kick off with the work environment, just more generally, and obviously it applies to many different fields, including sports and betting. But pre-COVID, let's say, if we can go back to whenever that was, it feels like a few years ago now.
Yeah.
How much time, if any, were you allocating to people thinking about their environment? And that might be, the sports bettor that stays at home and has a home office. Were you going through how many screens to have, what size of the screen, what brightness, which lights to turn on during the day, what natural light needs to come in, what type of chair they're using? Were those the types of things that you would even address pre-COVID?
No. I mean, there are people that do that, and I would put them in the category of more of the team environment, the culture kind of coach, the ones who are really trying to craft and make sure that the environment reinforces all the things that you want. And to a degree, I will do that, right? It's like, putting up some, verbiage on a wall or signage or, inspirational messages, like things of that sort, that your environment is kind of like reflecting the ideals and the mentality that you want to have. But I'd say that's probably like less than 1% of, like the overall work it's probably less than 1,000% of the overall work that I do. For me, that like the meat and potatoes is really in like getting deep into understanding where is the larger like emotional flaws that force bettors, traders, athletes to make poor decisions when it matters.
Okay, interesting. And you mentioned NFL GMs before and head coaches. Do you think that they also need coaching, or can you coach a coach, if that's the right term, or a manager, or whoever the person in charge is of a group of players? Is that a field as well that does exist?
It does, yeah, and I think yes, it definitely exists. No different than like the executive coaching exists for CEOs. There oftentimes is a skill set in that where they were former coaches themselves. That they have. They're not usually those people are not like in my role where it's really about like the head coach's mental performance exclusively. It's also about training them on environment and culture and understanding players and how to do like player analysis and player development and things of that sort. I do that a little bit more so with my esports teams because there's just a need for it and there's nobody else. And so it's like, all right, well, I have some knowledge in that area, so I'll raise my hand and get at it. But for me, like I look at like the head coach's ability to manage pressure and stress and all the things that they have, and it doesn't you don't have to go too far to find examples of coaches choking under pressure. The one that jumps out to my mind is Pete Carroll throwing from the 1-yard line against the Patriots a few years back. When you have Marshawn Lynch in the backfield. So there are coaches that fail all the time, and so yeah, there's a psychological need for that. I haven't actually done any of that work. But it certainly is interesting.
So let's start with poker. You must have been following the Gelfond Challenge has been going on, and there's a million good examples of things we could talk about within that. But I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you watch, if you did follow it or watch it or have any engagement with it, how does someone like yourself do that? Are you able to just be a fan and watch, or are you thinking of all the different elements given? For those that haven't seen it, you can go and check it out. But I think it was, 25,000 hands of poker, and it just seems like a very interesting experiment. And from that, I'm sure there's plenty of things that many different people learn. Obviously, the swings and the variance and just the longevity of the amount of hands and things like that. But how do you watch it or engage with it, or people in your field, those types of things?
So I kind of keep in touch with it as here's what's something that's happening. I watched a few hands as they were kind of getting down to the finish, but mostly I just kind of keeping up to date with the swings and how it was going, and kind of looking at Phil's messaging to the community. And I think he really represented himself very well. For those that don't know, and I'll give a little bit of a spoiler, a cliff note here. At one point, very early in the challenge, Phil was down $1 million, and the bet was basically 25,000 hands. Whoever's up, even $1 wins. I think Phil was putting up 200K to his opponent's 100K as the side bet, plus obviously whatever the profit was. But very early in the challenge, Phil was down $1 million. Just in terms of like kind of raw profit loss. at the beginning, and so he ended up taking a few days off to figure out what the hell was going on. This is a guy that has a family, runs a training site, just launched an online poker site. So, his focus on actually playing PLO at the highest level of the world is, not kind of first and foremost when he got in. So I think he jumped in expecting to be a little rusty. Probably was a lot more rusty than he thought, and I think really needed to work to get his mentality and his game in shape. And yeah, I think he represented himself incredibly well and was a model for a lot of people in terms of how to handle runs and swings like that. And I think he was saying the right things. My gut tells me that he was early on, I think, experiencing a lot more emotional pain than he was expressing, which is to be expected. But I mean, anybody who's down $1 million, very quickly into a big bet is not going to be had a great time.
Take us through what happens in those discussions during that, day off, couple of days off there, when I'm guessing he had a coach, or he at least had someone he was leaning on, whether it was, his wife or whoever it was. How do you counsel someone in that situation? Is there any good way to go about it, or is there steps that could or should have been taken weeks and months prior to basically prepare for if that scenario pops up?
Well, I think in ideal circumstances, sure, yeah. But I think you gotta look, and I think a lot of people need to take this to heart too. It's like sometimes the right answer is just to go do it and figure it out on the fly. I mean, because for those who are more of the perfectionists, the ones who are going to kind of delay and take a bit too long to kind of get started, sometimes you do just have to throw yourself in there and figure it out, reactively. Because yeah, of course you can be proactive and try to be as prepared and buttoned up as possible, but there's a cost to that, and the opportunity cost has to be calculated too. So I think given all of I understand it in terms of what goes on in Phil's life, it just wasn't practical for him to really prepare perfectly. And maybe in retrospect, he might have done a few things differently, but that's in retrospect, and I'm sure he's going to have future challenges and, we're off and running. But, I think in those conversations, at least, the way that I would, operate is that we're just being very surgical at identifying all of the individual things that he's been struggling with. Whenever you are trying to figure out how to stop, to fix a problem, you got to really make sure that you understand it completely. So we're talking about all the thoughts, all the emotional reactions, the things that you're saying out loud, the changes in your decision making, the changes in your behavior, the effect on your sleep. You're trying to map the problem as clearly as you can and create a bunch of line items of all the individual things that need to get corrected, and then you just get at it and you take that, put it together. I'm sure some of it was just a little bit of time off, because when you accumulate a lot of emotion, there is just kind of only one way for it to go, right? Like, to actually reduce that emotionality is not going to happen in an instant. It's actually, I think, fairly similar to the buildup of lactic acid in the muscles, where to get rid of it, you really have to do some hardcore treatment, or it's just going to take a few days for it to actually just have the body kind of absorb and deal with it. And to a certain degree, emotionally, it's the same kind of process. So again, we're kind of just trying to be really surgical at identifying all the weaknesses and flaws and come up with corrections for them.
So right now, post a challenge like that, and I'm sure many people have had a 5-6 figure payday, whatever, hopefully lucky enough to have 7-figure paydays or months or whatever, seasons. In those circumstances, what do you do now when you're coming off probably as high as it gets, just given the world as it is right now, the amount of people probably watching, just how the challenge went for him? Let's just say the World Series was starting tomorrow. Are you saying don't even bother entering? Are you saying you're on a positive swing here, we've got to continue to treat it the same way? Or is it something where it's just a new day, start again, refresh, and forget what just happened?
Yeah, the latter. I mean, I wouldn't say entirely forget what just happened. I would say take what you learned and use it as the next kind of building block. Everybody listening to this understands, the probability. And so what just happened does not predict what is going to happen in either direction. So, as long as he's got the energy, you're going to go play a big series like the World Series. And as long as you're rested and feel strong enough to do that, then yeah, get at it. The hangover, positively, I would say just keep an eye out for signs of some, overconfidence, some complacency, edges that are being pushed that are a little bit loose, and make sure that you're, kind of keeping yourself in check. But I don't think the need to miss a big opportunity is kind of guaranteed or assured for everybody. I think everybody does need to kind of, be very accurate with themselves and very honest with themselves about the extent to which they're actually, like a bit too kind of jacked up on what just happened, and are now going to be pushing edges and probably gambling a bit more than would be ideal. I'm not saying that you can't, kind of push edges that you might not normally, but if they're too far outside of your strategy, then you're essentially gambling, and eventually it's going to turn on you.
If someone did have a 5-figure payday and they did everything right, or at least they were, encountering adversity, got through it, and did have a win, let's say, whatever sport or trading or whatever it might be, is that a learning moment that you can use in 18 months' time, for example, or is it something that you just tuck away and hopefully you don't necessarily need to refer to it at all?
No. I mean, I think every accomplishment, big and small, needs to be tucked away and valued proportionally. Sometimes people are far too under appreciative of the things that they've done. A lot of people have that kind of it's never good enough mentality. They're just always kind of just like, what's next, and they're never actually kind of looking back and solidifying the gains that they've made, the things that they've learned, the skills that they've acquired, the perspective that they have either on their betting, their game, themselves, their opponents, to make sure that they're kind of keep leveling up, and because all of that does create stability and some sense of solidness for when you do inevitably struggle. The analogy that I would give is like climbing a mountain, right? A lot of what we're trying to do is just keep climbing these bigger and bigger peaks. And you could either free solo it, right? Meaning that you're climbing without rope, and if you slip, you're going to die. Obviously watch that movie if you haven't seen it, Free Solo.
Alex
It's insane. Yeah, exactly. But emotionally, mentally, that's how it feels for a lot of people. So that then when they actually do slip up and they have some setbacks, they have some failures, it does feel like they kind of hit rock bottom, which is usually perceptual bullshit, because they're just not aware of all of the things that they are still really competent in, still solid about, the accomplishment they've had, and so they start questioning things about their performance, or about their skill set, about their industry, or about their opportunity, that are just excessive. Now, I'm not saying don't reevaluate your opportunity, but do so in a practical way, and do so at a time when you're not emotionally compromised, right? That's not the right time to do it. You want to be doing it from a perspective of strength and a perspective of weakness. So when you do recognize all the gains that you've made and you kind of have that at your back, it actually means that you're climbing with anchors into the mountain, so that when you do fall, you fall and you're kind of caught, and you're not falling that far.
Yeah, it's interesting because so let's just say you are climbing one of those peaks and you got a higher mountain to climb ultimately, in terms of career and life and aspirations and whatever. If you're the kind of person that gets to the ledge and stands up and yelling, screaming with happiness, pumping your fist, that type of reaction, versus someone who's very solemn and says, look, I just, this is ledge number 1. I got 10 ledges to go. I can't get too excited. Is there a benefit or an advantage or disadvantage even to being either of those? Or is it trying to train yourself to be somewhere in the middle, perhaps?
I think the optimal is that you feel proportionally good for what you just accomplished, for the amount of time period that you can, that's not excessive. And so, yeah, that doesn't sound like very specific, but like, let's just say, it is the World Series, or it is a big season of horse racing. And at the end of it, it's sort of like a forced 3-month break. So yeah, you can revel in it if you've done really, really well. If you made more money than you ever had, before, if you won some titles, won some bracelets, or even just one. Yeah, go celebrate, have some fun, take a week, take 2 weeks, enjoy yourself. I'm not saying spend all your money in that time period. I'm just saying revel in the success that you had, because when you have success like that, it is not just about the result. I think that's where people get a little bit kind of misconstrued. It is confirmation for everything you have done that led to that point. And yeah, there's got to be some luck that's involved in those two industries, but not obviously for some sports. But the reality is that when you are confirming everything you've done before, it doesn't mean that you can't still learn, you can't still get better, but at least shows that what you were doing is working, and that provides a good boost of more stable motivation, stable confidence to move you forward. If you don't have a 2-month break and you have 4 days before you're going to get back at it, something big, take a PGA Tour player who wins a major. and then has to go play the next week. Like, how do you, recalibrate? Like, what they may do is like take a day, maybe two at most, to celebrate that, especially if it's their first one. And then, get ready for the next event. Like, you want to be trying to get out there, trying to win that one. And then at some point there's going to be a break, and that's when you can kind of take the step back and have a little bit more kind of reveling. But I do think it is really, really important for people to take a step back, and just enjoy some of that success, right? And for some, that is really, really hard. And if you just say, oh, like, I can't do that, it doesn't feel natural, fine, learn, right? It's a muscle like anything else. Like, you can learn anything. It's not like it's the law of your nature that you can't do that. There may be patterns in you that automatically kind of force you out of that mentality, and which makes it difficult. I mean, perfectionism is kind of like public enemy number one for that, because invariably you are constantly always looking at what's next. But it's on some level it's a skill. On some level, there's a deeper pattern that has to get fixed, but you can certainly learn it.
Where does goal setting fit within this? And if we take Phil's challenge we're referencing earlier, what if he said, I want to win by 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000, and doesn't achieve it necessarily, but in hindsight maybe there's a better way to look at it. Does that factor into how you approach these types of situations?
I mean, so for me, like, goal setting, there's a lot of layers to and nuances to goal setting. A lot of people are not very good at it, and then that, like, invariably kind of affects their emotional state in pretty dramatic ways, especially when there's a lot of variance involved. So I think what you have to do is you have to set goals if there is high levels of variance in there, where you have, like, what you think is a reasonable target. It's going to happen. If variance is fairly neutral, that's the target that you're really aiming for. Variance is really in your favor, you set a high target. Variance is, like, hard against you, you set a low target. Now, in Phil's case, where you're trying to win a challenge like that, variance is still hard against you. Your goal is to win by $1, right? Not by not assuming that you're going to lose, right? Oh, it's like it's a win if I lose by only 1,000 if variance is against me. That's not the way you want to set the goal. But I think it is important to set at least kind of three different targets, because what happens is if you run badly and you've got this big goal out there, people are smart, right? You know how much you might be making, in terms of on turnover, how much you're making, per week or per hour, or per bet. And so if you've dug a hole, like, you can tell pretty quickly that, that your goal is gone. And so then your motivation drops, and now you become a little bit more hopeless, and now you lose a little bit more motivation, and your betting becomes like, there's a ways in which those like big goals can really kind of hang over you and affect your short-term performance. So if you have set up at the beginning, some variety, then, like, those goals should always be motivating for you. Like, there's always going to be a target that you can still reach, so that the low end of that goal, variance is tough, really hard against you, like, you still see a way for you to accomplish something, right? And so that's, like, kind of it from a result standpoint. But I think it's really important to also be setting more process-oriented goals, where you might say, all right, I'm going to evaluate my play, my decision making, and I've got it scaled. So let's say A game, B game, C game, and I want to have like an average rating of like an A minus over a 1 month period of time, and you've got, like, good details, so it's not like you're just pulling guesses out of your ass, right? Your A game represents decision making that looks like this, B game same, and so you can look at the end of the day, like, all right, what percentage of your bets or your decisions were in those categories, and you give yourself a grade. Or you might say you might do that with regards to just focus. You might look at just putting in the raw hours. If motivation is something that's more difficult for you, and just putting in the hours and putting in the time is key, then you set some kind of process goals around putting in those hours. But I do think it's important when you have those big result oriented goals, you have the process pieces behind it, because then if you do fail, then you also have things that you could still have more control of. You could still have things that you could build on. And then the failure gets kind of buffered by that, so it's not quite as deep. And it gives you something that you can then kind of work off of for the next goal. Because ultimately, goal setting is a skill in itself. And if you're bad at it, then that means that you're unlikely to reach your goals, or your goals were too easy to get. Either way, right? getting better at the skill of setting goals means getting better at the skill of self-evaluating your own capability, evaluating the opportunities that are in front of you, and then being able to kind of turn that into some estimation, which is ultimately what a goal is. It's an estimate of what you think you can accomplish, and kind of go after it. Now, if you're somebody who's a golfer or an athlete who has like titles that are in play, and those become your goals. So that's not an estimation of a goal. It's like a very specific target that you're trying to acquire, or a poker player trying to win a bracelet. But if you're setting money goals, then those are estimations, no different than a company setting their projections for the year, or the projections for the first quarter.
So then, in general, it sounds like we don't want any goal-setting approach that might be bad, even to impact the decision-making and the process part. But there are instances, it seems like, where if it's a World Series final table and you're short stacked or whatever, then there are certain things that might be acceptable within that type of framing.
No doubt. And I think we end up seeing, certainly the main event where, the short stack comes in, has already locked up $1 million, and the most likely scenario is they're not going to make any more. So they come in, with a lot of freedom. It's all upside. Their goal is nothing. It's like whatever happens is great. Then you have the guy who's the chip leader who might come in with a bit more pressure, feeling like, for him, if he would walk away with anything less than $1 million, or anything less than ninth place would be a tragedy. So they can sometimes kind of come in there a bit too tight and protecting, feeling like something's already theirs. We all have hundreds of examples of professional sports teams who have tried to protect a lead. So yeah, the perspective that you have on what you're trying to accomplish and the state that you're in the road to accomplishing that, can be really can cause a lot of variation in your performance, and then you can kind of use those problems to better understand some patterning, that may affect you elsewhere in smaller ways, like the idea of protecting a lead, right? Obviously, it shows up in a big way in a final table where you're chip leader. But how might that show up in a smaller way? Let's say, month over month, when, you've had like the best, you've had a good run, 20 days into the month, and you're like, maybe I'll shut it down so I can lock up the best month of the year, or maybe I'll just start like betting, a little bit less, or playing a little bit less poker to kind of just sneak out. And that doesn't seem like that big a deal to you because obviously, the money says otherwise, but you're still bleeding opportunity, and that's not an optimal way of handling it if that issue wasn't there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have one unrelated, strange question, perhaps, and maybe not a topic that you talk about. I certainly don't read or hear much about it, but using drugs, is it something that is covered much in this space? And obviously, you think about whether it's poker, whether it's sports betting, people are grinding double-digit hour days, multiple days in a row. In poker anyway, online, you can have many tables, many screens, all that type of thing. Is it something within the industries that you've worked within or have been a part of that it's commonly discussed and approached sensibly, or is it something that's a bit more taboo and isn't necessarily addressed at all?
Do you mean like in terms of taking like prescription medication, like a Ritalin or Adderall or Modafinil?
Even like you hear about, I'm a lawyer, and people going to do exams and either studying and throughout their, before the final exam, essentially doing, Adderall, whatever it might be, to allow them to do that. Then even during an exam, take certain things, or if it's even stronger than that, or even just generally, like whether it's to mellow out or other things that may be possible.
Yeah. It's definitely not talked about publicly that often. It definitely certainly is in some place, and then it's also talked about in circles or in kind of more live settings. Yeah, listen, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't prescribe medication. It's not something I certainly advocate my clients to figure out how to create that kind of competency or that level of acuity without drugs, because obviously then you have more control. But when they are prescribed it and they're using it, then I try to help to balance it out so that they're not ultimately doing it in a counterproductive way. There's a fairly famous example a few years ago when Phil Hellmuth said he used Adderall at a final table, and it said it messed him up big time. And I'm not surprised because, Adderall can make you focus, but for somebody like Phil, who's never used it, or I don't think I'd used it in that setting before, what it can do is remove creativity. It can remove that kind of that extra sense of that extra feel. So it actually was a big deterrent for him to actually be able to get in the zone and be at his best. So certainly it's not like it's a holy grail. It is for some people. Like if you actually have ADD, then not using those medications is like I guess like swimming without shorts on. You're just you're not using technology available to you that's going to make you better.
So I talk to a lot of different people who all reiterate you got to find your edge and you got to find something that's contrary to what other people are doing and so on and so forth. And it strikes me, based on what we've discussed earlier, that having that emotional control or that emotional ability to adapt to certain situations is a skill set that isn't being fully utilized by the masses and obviously those at the tip of the sword as well. Is that something that can significantly enhance what you're currently doing? Or it seems like there's only a limited amount of time in the day. There's a limited amount of domain expertise you can have. You can only know so much about certain things. But on the emotional side, it does seem like something that, if explored and addressed properly, can be a big level up situation.
No doubt. And I think anybody who's listening to this that hasn't done that work before, what I would say is just evaluate how good you are when you're at your best and at your worst. Right? For some people, that gap is really wide. For some people, that gap is fairly narrow. But the question becomes, when you are at your worst, are you losing money? Like for some poker players, they are so good in the games that they're playing, even when they're in their C game, they're still making money. So their motivation to work on the mental side is not nearly as high as somebody who's actually like losing money in those spots. And especially if the gap between your best and your worst is really wide, then you have to ask yourself the question, how much money are you losing doing things and making decisions that are wrong? Because that's what ends up happening at the back end, right? And in my experience, almost in all situations, those types of mistakes are caused because of some mental and emotional variation, some cause on that side of the coin, which means that you've done all this work to develop this edge and develop competencies, but you're not able to utilize that edge because your emotions are blocking you from being able to do that. So if you continue to learn more and more, guess what? That problem is not going to get better. It's going to get worse because the gap between your best and your worst is just going to keep getting wider. And then you're going to get in the situation where you're going to rely on getting hot. You're going to have to take time off because it's so energy intensive for you to escape your emotions in that regard and be able to be consistently at your best, that you're just not going to be able to do it very often. And you're going to have these big swings, these big ups and downs in terms of your performance because like athletes would, the gap between your best and your worst is just too wide. You have to shrink that in order to develop more consistency and more stability. And the only way to do that is to correct the mental and emotional flaws that are causing you to make those boneheaded, stupid, obvious mistakes. Right? They are not caused by you lacking knowledge. Right? The fact that you know exactly what you should have done in the moment or immediately afterwards shows you that you don't have anything to learn from a tactical or strategic standpoint. You have to remove the emotion that is blocking your higher brain function from functioning properly in order for you to access that knowledge in those moments. Right? That's the problem. So being able to like actually do that work for some people is the only way that they're actually going to be either consistent or able to make money.
Is there some form of measurement for all of that? Obviously, there are in other things where you could probably sit someone down and give them a bunch of hands and put cards on the table and say, what do we do in this situation? What do we do in that situation? You can probably kind of assess someone's acumen when it comes to certain elements. What about when it comes to this type of thing? Have you found anything that is useful in order to A, measure and B, assess on an ongoing basis?
No. It's self-assessment. Or you've got good friends around you who can get you to wake up.
Interesting. Okay, so you mentioned esports before. I'm curious, age-wise, is there anything you found from that perspective? Are the younger generation more amenable? And obviously anyone can play esports. There can be, older people, of course. But just in your experience so far, has that been anything meaningful come out of that?
Yeah. I mean, had some pretty big success already. A game called Dota, which has the game that has the biggest prize pool in the world, a tournament called the International. Last year, the prize pool was $35 million. First place won $15 million. My team finished second. They won 4.8, but 2 years prior to that, they actually won 12.8 million. Another team in a game called Counter-Strike, they won something called the Intel Grand Slam, which means that they won 4 big events before anybody else won 4 big events. So it's kind of this like contest over like kind of the season, and they won $1 million bonus as a result of that. We're the #1 team in the world for a while. The League of Legends team won 4 North American championships sequentially in 2018, 2019. And, I know for sure that I played a part, right? Just like any good team, everyone plays a role. My role was maybe, anywhere between 2 and 10%, depending on the situation. But
That's huge.
certainly, yeah, I mean, certainly, the team, the Dota team winning the international, the situation for them, both in the year that they won and the year that they finished second, there was it basically was like a double elimination bracket. And so if you were, they had placed in the upper bracket, in 2017, they were the #1 seed coming out of groups. And then they lost in their first round and were immediately in a situation where they could not lose another match or they were out of the tournament. And being #1, having lost, was pretty gutting. And so they had to dig deep and kind of get their shit together and grind through the lower bracket and basically play double the amount of games in order to get to the finals that the team that went through the upper bracket did. And so, yeah, in both years, both last year and in 2017, they had to do that. And so I think, my value there was huge, right? Because any misstep and they were out of the tournament. And certainly those first couple games where they were trying to get their footing back was really big. The Counter-Strike team had some new players, a new coach come involved, and but there was for them just a need to figure out like how they played their best, right? What was the key to unlocking? I should say all of these games are 5-player games. So for me, most of my work up until coaching, Team Liquid is the name of the organization that all of these teams are under. Coaching with Team Liquid, I had always worked with individuals. Sometimes I'd worked with teams of poker players, but still doing individual work and a little bit of kind of group work. But now we're actually working with 5 individuals, a coach, maybe sometimes a manager, an assistant, and trying to get everybody on the same page in terms of their communication, understanding how to like unlock the talents of all the individual players, how they best work together, both in and out of the game. These were some of the environmental things I was mentioning at the outset that I kind of was able to bring in and help them to figure out how they play their best. And so that was the big thing for the Counter-Strike team. And then, the League of Legends team, a bunch of different issues coming and going, but, some motivational stuff, individual player performance, getting the staff and the coaching staff to really understand how to develop players and improve in a very efficient, sequential manner was big in that. So, yeah, it's been fun, doing that kind of work. It's definitely different, and it's caused me to be putting on a lot of travel miles prior to coronavirus. But it's actually nice to be home and not traveling right now. So not the worst thing in the world. I get to work with these guys remotely, and it can still be just as effective.
What are some of the major differences? Is it much the same as a golfer or a poker player, sports gambler who's at home in the office, or are there similarities? How does it stand up against those others?
Yeah, it certainly is the same in terms of performance, in terms of the types of issues that can emerge. Everybody's different. Everybody's needs are different. Everybody's problems are different. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to each person's individual receptivity and openness to doing the work. The difference with Team Liquid is that the organization is the one paying me, not the individual players. So the players are not forced to do it. And if they were, that would actually be problematic. So what I've had to do, and really has been partially the challenge, is like developing trust with some people who are more resistant. There's one player on the Counter-Strike team who I've worked with for 4 years now. And he's done some amazing work. But, when I first started working with him, I think he was, 19 or 20 and, didn't really have any, perspective or knowledge and, doing mental game work, and, was rightfully resistant and not resistant, but just didn't really understand it. Thought it was sort of the like, so I'm the one with the problem, so that's why I got to talk to you kind of thing. Not the, you're the guy that actually can help me be better. But over time, like I've kind of built up that trust, and so now it's cool because the guys are all pretty open, and they sort of see the value and are willing to do the work.
And the same issues with overconfidence going into a tournament, performance anxiety, going on tilt because you should have won a round or a tournament and you didn't because of crazy things happening, and just variance in performance. All that stuff is pretty much the same as it applies to everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, it's again, each person is going to have their own thing, but yeah, you just go down the list of the major mental game issues, from fear and greed and overconfidence to loss of confidence to motivational issues and boredom and burnout and focus issues, and dealing with social media and having good balance in your life and proper training regimen. And these guys are professionals. I mean, they work really hard, and some of them are working harder than some athletes because they are young, they don't know any better, they love it, and they think the way to get better is to play 14 hours a day, and they do. So yeah, at the end of the day, we're all people first, and then what we do second. And so because we're all people and we share 99.999% of our DNA with each other, there just is not that much diversity that exists in the types of issues that we'll experience. Where the diversity is in the application of the strategy, or in the ways in which the issues will show up. Right, like there's a language all to it. There's a culture. There's a timing. There's a pacing that is just in the inherent diversity of all of these different competitive arenas. But like I said, we're people first. So pick the industry, and you'll see the same stuff.
And you mentioned balance there. In the corporate world, it seems like things have gone from industrial workers and no balance at all potentially, and a certain period of time to you need work-life balance, and you want to work at Facebook and Google and these places, and you'll have sleeping pods and whatever else and all that type of thing, to now where even more recently it seems like it might be going the other way, more so than anything, and figuring out the balance situation isn't as simple as it was. How does it apply in your world? Is there an easy trick to it when it comes to balance, or is it not that simple?
It's not that simple, because balance is a function of what it is that you're balancing with, right? Like, see, it's all about your goals. And we could say the same thing about discipline, right? You need to be balanced and you need to be disciplined as much as your goals will allow, right? If you have huge goals, then, the way in which your personal life balance is going to look is different than somebody that has small goals. And it should. Same with discipline, right? You don't need to be more disciplined than is necessary to achieve your goals. You don't want to be. That's like constrictive. That doesn't make any sense, right? Now, that person's drive and motivation to accomplish something really big is going to carry them forward and allow them to not get as burned out than somebody else that wouldn't, because their drive and their motivation is going to be much more relentless. That doesn't mean that they can't just go relentlessly without taking breaks and without balancing the need to recuperate, right? That's a necessity, because that's how you continue to level up and get stronger and develop. No different than an athlete in the gym or in the pool or running or wherever they are, right? Muscles will break down just the same way, or your mind will break down in the same way that your muscles will. So, the need for that is necessary. And sometimes, people need to do other things. They need to be with their family. They need to be with their friends. They need to travel. They need to go out for a good meal, go out partying, like whatever it is that you need to kind of help that kind of reset so that you're better, the next day. That's what it is. Some people need it in bigger chunks, right? So they're completely unbalanced, like, NFL football players would be for 9 months. And then, they're balanced the other way for the other 3 months out of the year. Or some people are looking for balance on a much more consistent, ongoing basis. So how do you create that? Right? There is individual formulas that can be created, but on the whole, your measuring stick as to whether or not you're balanced or not, to me, is, are you achieving your goals? And those might not be just exclusive to your professional industry. They also may be in terms of your personal goals too. Right? So that's the art of kind of juggling. I think it's much more about juggling than it is about balance. Like balance, if you kind of picture like the scales of justice, right? How do you create those two things to be equal? It's not about equality, right? You're not having equal amounts of personal time with equal amounts of work time. If you're trying to, win a World Series of Poker bracelet, or you're trying to, make $1 million betting. If you're trying to, win a major, esports title, or win a professional golf tournament, right? And you haven't done that before, then you need to be working in an unbalanced way than most people, who work normal 9-to-5 jobs would view. So, but that's why you've chosen it, right? Like you've chosen it because you're out there trying to do something great. And if you're trying to do something great, then to other people you're going to look obsessive and you're going to look compulsive and you're going to look unbalanced and like you're not taking care of yourself. But there's ways of doing it professionally that still allow you to do it without compromising your own health. Because if you're not healthy and you're not strong, then you are going to kind of decompromise and kind of burn out. So you want to be pushing your edges, but understanding kind of how to back off and rest and recuperate and be stronger for it.
And one final area I wanted to touch on related to this was just the mindfulness aspect. And, obviously people think of meditation, breathing exercises, yoga, whatever it might be. Is it a non-downside type thing where, if you're going to do it, it doesn't seemingly have any issues rather than time if it doesn't have an upside? Or is it further to that did you think it's very worthwhile and it should be part of any different regimen?
I mean, no, it's not like it's a requirement. Meditation, mindfulness, tools to build focus, tools to build awareness. Some people, I think in some circles, it's oversold. It's looked at as a solution. But at the end of the day, like what is real, right, is that you can use any activity as a tool for suppression of deeper issues. Right. So yoga, exercise, any of these, like nutrition, people can be a bit psychotic and go overboard with any of these, quote, like healthy activities. And what they end up doing is they use that as a way of releasing negative emotion, blocking out those emotions, rather than actually doing the work to resolve them, correct them, and eliminate them. So yes, they are tools, right? Yes, they can be productive and healthy, but there's lots of ways to skin a cat, and it doesn't have to be that way.
So we didn't touch on going on tilt, and we didn't touch on, anxiety in much detail, all those different things. We talked about that the first time around. There's plenty of great podcasts where you talk about it out in the world. And obviously you had a podcast back in the day that plenty of people will probably go back and listen to. And your books are free. Tell us, jaredtendlerpoker.com/free. Audible books, right? They're both free?
Yeah, Amazon still is pushing free audiobooks pretty hard. So, yeah, The Mental Game of Poker 1 and 2. Just go to jaredtendlerpoker.com/free, and there's links where you can click through and get the audiobooks for free. Certainly in the Corona world right now, it's a quick and easy way to get it. I think they've had some issues with the soft covers getting out, but obviously it's on ebook as well.
Awesome. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Jared. It's a lot of fun. I know people get a lot out of it, and it's it's always a undercovered area. So I appreciate stealing 45, 50 minutes of your time, and I'm sure everyone will enjoy it. And until next time, appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks, Jake. Be well, man.